Hello, welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, we're going to look at possibly my favorite plugin in the MPC, Air Tube Drive. It's absolutely free. It comes with your MPC, which is one of the benefits of it. I absolutely love it. If you've seen my videos, you'll see that I go on about it quite a lot, and I've been promising to make a video about it. In my DAW, I've been using a plugin called Decapitator from Sound Toys pretty much since it first came out, so 10 plus years. And I love the tape saturation sound that you can get from it, the analog saturation sound that you can get from it. In the MPC, although it doesn't have as many functions as Sound Toys Decapitator, Air Tube Drive certainly comes close to the sound that you can get from Decapitator. And that's possibly why I love it. Let's jump in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the basic functions of Air Tube Drive, and then I'm going to demonstrate it on various sources. Now, please bear in mind that you can absolutely smash this effect, but I tend to use it in a more subtle way. And it's also important to level match as much as possible as well, because you can be fooled by the louder is better. So I'll do that as best as I can. But like I said, remember, it's a very, very subtle effect. The way that I use it is very, very subtle. What you're listening for is bite, a little bit of saturation, a kind of edginess, a kind of edge of distortion. It's not a distortion plugin, although you can actually make it sound like a distortion plugin. But you're going to have to listen very, very carefully. But I think you'll be able to hear how it enhances the sound, because what you are in effect doing is boosting harmonics by adding saturation. So you can help sounds push through the mix. 808 kicks, for instance, is the classic one that people use it on. So it pushes through the low mids, the mids, and even the high mids to some extent, and will help the source that you're putting it on push through the mix without actually really increasing the actual level. So very, very simple plugin. You have a drive, which is how far you want to drive the tubes, I guess would be the best way to describe it. Headroom is in effect reducing, as you can see, it goes from 0 dB down. What you're actually doing is you're reducing the level at which the source will clip. So the further you bring it down, the sooner your source is going to start kind of driving into that saturation sound. Saturation is exactly as it says, it's saturation. So the more you put on there, the more saturation. And the output level obviously is going to help you level match and give you an overall output at the end of the chain of effects that you've added in the tube drive, if that makes sense. So, as I said, it's going to be very, very subtle what I tend to do. I will drive it so that you can hear it, mostly with the headroom. And just remember, like I said, headroom is in effect reducing the level at which you're going to start clipping. So that's kind of the thing is with this plugin is you kind of have to feel your way through it. That's why some of the presets in here well, actually, most of the presets in here aren't really of that much use, because every single source that you put through it is going to be different, and it's going to be at different levels. It's going to be different frequency ranges. So they're kind of a little bit pointless. Sorry, Akai, but they are. I have an initial one, which I have set up. Their initial one, which is right at the start there, is completely different. And again, basically useless, because every single source that you run through it is going to be different. So I've saved my own initialization preset here where everything is on 0, and as soon as I use this plugin I go straight to that so I can start from 0. You can of course 0 it yourself. That's a lot quicker, not quicker. Another way of doing it, wouldn't say quicker, probably around about the same, because you do have to still go through. But I like to be on 0 with this plugin, and then I feel my way into it. And you know, I can't give you a setting that is a golden setting that will work on every single source, because it won't. So you have to use your ears, you have to drop in and out of bypass, and you have to use your output to level match. That's really, really important that you do that on a plugin like this. It would be great if it had auto level match, but we don't have that on the MPC yet. Perhaps it's coming, who knows. So as I said, I'm going to use it on several sources. I've got a house drum kit, I've got a master, I've got a Moog sound, or Moog sound, depending on how you say it, a Breakbeat, some guitars, and finally some vocals. And it will just be to give you an idea of how you can use it on each one. But again, I stress that it's a subtle plugin. However, you can smash it. But I tend to use it in a subtle way, as a color box, as a way of adding some character, imprinting some, dare I say, analog sound to your sources. So we're going to start with the house kit, and I'll just kind of feel my way into it and show you how I would use it in that kind of situation. So this would be, you have to think of it as being used on a bus, because it's all of the drums rather than using it on an individual sound. So you can hear I've dialed it in quite quickly, but as I said, you kind of have to feel your way. So set kind of like a drive level, how much kind of saturation you're aiming for. Do I want real subtle saturation, or do I want it to be quite evident, almost imprinting a character to the sound? Then you know, dial back your headroom, and that's where it's almost like a wet dry, I guess, because you know, if I have my wet headroom right up here, it's not really going to have very much of an effect, because I'm not taking it down to the point where it would start kind of getting that tape saturation sound. So use your headroom to kind of dial in how much of the effect you actually want to be using. And as I said, make sure to use the output to level match, because then it's a lot easier to get a true idea of what effect you're actually having on the sound, rather than get fooled by the louder is better. So here what I've done is I've added a little bit of saturation, it's kind of added some grit and bite to the snares, a little bit, and the hi-hats. The kick drum has got almost a little bit of kind of, not distortion, but a bit more bite to it, and it will cut through the mix a lot easier when you're listening to it on things like phones or sound systems which don't have a lot of low end on it. So it just kind of enhancing the harmonics, adding the saturation, just kind of adds a little bit more bite to everything. But again, very, very subtle. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the Mini D, the Moog inside the MPC. I've just written a very basic kind of leady, kind of bassy line. Leady bassy? Another phrase I've invented today. So very, very basic. Okay, let's go into tube drive. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to feel my way. But what I really want to do with this is really thicken it up and take it from a kind of mediocre sound in the Moog to a more kind of beefy, saturated, almost as if it's being recorded on reel-to-reel tape, and I've kind of clipped it a little bit. So again, feel my way using the tube drive to get the kind of sound that I want. So as you can hear, it's kind of pushing the low mids up a little bit. The harmonics are in there. It's adding a bit of bite and a bit of grit to it, and just makes it sound, to me, more like an actual MiniMoog rather than a digital version of it. The Mini D in this is decent, very, very decent, in fact. But I do find that I need to add a little bit of EQ to it, possibly an amp sim, and then definitely tube drive. If I did have to just use one plugin, I would use tube drive, because I can use that to kind of manipulate the frequency ranges in the MiniMoog by using the saturation and the headroom and the drive, etc. So again, quite subtle, but a little less subtle than I used on the house beat, but just kind of giving it more depth, more width, sounds fatter, and just sounds a bit meatier. Okay, so now moving on to a breakbeat. So using the same principles again, I just want this to sound a bit more dirtier. This is a CD remaster of early 70s funk break. It's not the original vinyl. On my original vinyl, it probably would have sounded a little bit meatier, but it was very, very crackly. It's quite a rare beat. And so I tend to use the remastered version on CD. Do they even make CDs anymore? I don't know. So what I need to do is I need to dirty it up, just make it sound a little bit dirtier. It's already pretty gritty, but let's just dirty it up. Again, using the same principles, same techniques. Let's just feel our way into it using the headroom, saturation and drive. So I've probably pushed that just a little bit too much, maybe take the saturation down. But for me, it just sounds more, it sounds more forward in the mix. The kick's got a nicer bite to it. And to me, it sounds like I'm recording it on reel-to-reel or even a cassette, and I'm clipping. It's pushing over 0 dB and it's clipping a little bit, but you get that lovely warm analog distortion, unlike the digital distortion that you would get. Although obviously this is an emulation of analog distortion. It isn't actually analog distortion, but it's pretty decent. So that to me is getting into the area where I like to have decapitator and just kind of getting that real kind of warm tape saturation sound. To me, I've lost that CD remastered sound from the break, and now it sounds a little bit more like I'm playing it off my turntable. I'm going into my desk and I'm just pushing it into the red a little bit and then sampling it that way. So next I'm going to demonstrate on some guitars. It really, really shines on guitars, but also other instruments that kind of take up that frequency range. So synth leads as well, you know, just something that has a lot of mid-range into high mids, but also you can bring up the kind of low mids and even the lows by using the tube drive. So I've got a couple of samples here. Both of them are real clean, straight into the desk, Nile Rodgers kind of disco looped guitars. And I'm just going to play them live. They're not looped, so they might be a little bit out of time whilst I'm doing it. Apologise for that. But it can really, really give your guitar some bite and just, you know, kind of that tube, very subtle tube screamer pedal, treble booster pedal. Just really, really nice. Really, really nice on guitars. I love it on guitars. So again, by feeling my way into the sample, I can kind of get to the point where I want to get to just by adjusting things. Cue links are perfect for that. As you know, if you watch my videos, you know that I don't use cue links very often. It's not because I don't like them, it's just because I'm just not used to using them. I'm just so used to using the data wheel because of the 3000 and the 2000 and the MPC 60, which I started on. So you only had a data wheel then. So I'm still, after all this time, getting used to cue links. Anyway. But it's really, really handy for this kind of plugin because you can just feel your way. You can almost close your eyes and feel your way, which is fantastic. So what I've done there is, again, it's that kind of guitar right on the edge of distortion, right on the edge of saturation, driving the harmonics, but just giving it a little bit of bite. It just sounds more, it doesn't sound bad. And perhaps I should really put this in context, because if I was to not play this in solo and actually play this over the top of a track and it was in the mix, that cleanness wouldn't sound great. I just know that from experience. By adding this saturation and this tube drive, by adding this kind of edginess, it will cut through the mix a lot nicer. So if we just move on to this other guitar here. So what I want to do with this one is demonstrate really pushing it and really making some of the frequencies bite through, really pushing the harmonics. So I've got the saturation a lot higher, I've brought the headroom down, and I'm going to drive it a little bit more. So then you can really, really hear it. It really sparkles in the mix. Again, I'd prefer to have it in context rather than in solo, but I think you can get the idea. So now I'm just going to demonstrate on some vocals, female vocals, just to kind of add a bit of character to it. It's a very clean vocal.
You're all that I wanted, but this couldn't last.
It's nice, it's got that kind of indie edge to it. So what I want to do is I just want to add some character to it. It will help it push through the mix a little bit more. Again, I'd prefer to have it actually in the mix rather than playing solo. But I'm going to just play it, feel my way into it again, and just give it a little bit of character. What I want to do is I want it to sound as if it's recorded on tape. I'm clipping it, and almost as if it's through a cheap microphone next to a cheap amp. Let's just dirty it up a little bit, because at the moment it's a little bit clean, a little bit nice, a bit fluffy, a bit rabbits jumping around in the fields. I want Tasmanian devils jumping around in dark woodland.
You're all that I wanted, but this couldn't last. I wish that it would. You're all that I wanted, but this couldn't last. You're all that I wanted. 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 You're all that I wanted, but this couldn't last. I wish that it would. You're all that I wanted, but this couldn't last.
Okay, so I went over the top a little bit and then I've dialed it back. That's a good way to get your effect in the right place. Just push it a little bit more than you want to. Listen to how the sound is reacting, maybe how it might be affecting the transients, the frequencies, the harmonics, and then just dial it back a little bit. So I've got it where I wanted it to be, and then I've just taken the headroom and maybe the drive down a little bit. So now you can hear her vocal has a little bit more character and just has a little bit more bite and just sounds a bit more, you know, like it would be in a record, rather than just somebody stood in the studio singing into a microphone.
You're all that I wanted, but this couldn't last. I wish that it would. You're all that I wanted, but this couldn't last. I wish that it would. You're all that I wanted, but this couldn't last. I wish that it would.
Okay, and finally, I'm going to demonstrate it on a master. Now, if you've watched my videos on mastering in the MPC, but also if you've watched my videos on actually mastering in my mastering studio, you'll know that the chain I tend to follow is surgical EQ, do some clipping work, maybe a little bit more EQ work, and then I go into my color box, which can be various plugins in my DAW. But in the MPC, it's tube drive, and then I go into my limiter. So in a master, what I tend to use color box for, saturation for, is just to kind of give it a bit more depth, just open the mix up a little bit. Tube drive's really, really nice for that if you use it subtly. So I'm hoping that you can hear what I'm doing. I have actually mastered this track in the MPC in a video, so do feel free to check that out and you'll see how I'm using the tube drive. But obviously here, this is the pre-master and I'm not using any EQ, I'm not using any compression, any limiting or any clipping. I'm just showing you the tube drive. So I think if you really want to get a full idea of how I would use tube drive if I was mastering in the MPC, or how I would use a plugin like tube drive if I was mastering in my studio, probably best idea is to watch that video or some of my other mastering videos. I think I've actually mastered this track in a video as well in my actual studio when I'm working in the box for the actual client, the actual master. I'm pretty certain, but you'll have to check my videos. Maybe I'll have a quick look and link it or put it in the comments. So like I said, this is going to be quite subtle, but I just want to show you what you can do when you've got an overall track running. See how much more upfront it makes the whole mix sound, because what you're doing is by enhancing the harmonics and adding the saturation, an area that you do tend to affect quite a lot are the mids and the high mids, and that just pushes everything outwards. But you're also enhancing what's already in the pre-master, and this was a fantastic pre-master. It was mixed really, really nicely. There was lots of information going on the sides, the highs, the reverbs, that kind of thing. So by using tube drive or using a color box in this way, you kind of push everything forward and you just open up everything. It blossoms, it blooms. Okay, so I've got that in a good place now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop it in and out of bypass. So listen to the, it's difficult. Try and isolate the mids and the high mids and just the way that the track can open up once I use tube drive. The reason why it's opening up is because I'm enhancing what's on the side. And so that kind of gives it this, it just seems to bloom like that. Bloom and blossom, I use that quite a lot in mastering when I'm talking about mastering. I think it's the best way to describe what happens. So yeah, if you just focus on the way that it opens up, listen to the clarity, how that opens up. But I hope I'm getting, I hope I'm getting the level matches just right, because I don't want to fool you by making it seem louder so it's better because it's louder. So I think I've got the level match right. So there you have it, Air Tube Drive, absolutely free in your MPC. Is it my favourite plugin? I would go as far as to say that it probably is, actually. It's such a simple plugin, but you can do so much with it if you really, really feel your way around it. You know, applying it to low-end signals, bass, that kind of thing, MiniMoog bass lines especially, you can really cut through the mix. 808 kicks, 909 kicks. It's just such a useful plugin. And, you know, when I was younger, I used to base my, people would say, what's your favorite plugin? And I've got to be honest, it tended to be plugins with really fancy GUIs, and, you know, they were allegedly emulating a synth or a piece of hardware that I absolutely loved, but I didn't really get it. It was more about how it looked and what it might be emulating, so that I could fantasize, I guess, that I had that piece of equipment. It's so stupid when I think about it now. But as I've got more experienced, as I've got older perhaps, I've started realizing that it's not necessarily about having a million plugins, it's about having a few really, really useful ones. And that now my favorite plugins are the plugins which actually get used in pretty much every mix that I do. And that's why it's things like Decapitator, because I do literally use that in every single mix. I think pretty much every single mix. The SSL G-Bus compressor, the Maag EQ from Plugin Alliance. You know, these are plugins that I use in pretty much every single mix that I do for a client and mixes that I do for myself. And in mastering, there's certain plugins like Standard Clip, Ash from Acoustica Audio. They're now my favorite plugins because they're actually useful rather than the way that they look and what they might be emulating. In the MPC AirTube drive, I don't know whether it's actually supposed to be emulating any particular type of hardware or any particular piece of hardware, whether it's a particular tape machine or a particular guitar pedal or tube or amp or anything like that. I don't actually care. I just love how it sounds, and that is why it probably is my favorite plugin in the MPC, and it's free. Well, apart from the fact that you have to buy an MPC, obviously. So thank you for watching. This is the Quakes Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.